Look, people want an Uber, and right now they're being sold car parts. They're like, here you go, here's a steering wheel, here's some engine, go build it yourself.
Yeah.
Bro, I just want to go from point A to point B. Like, just give me an Uber and get me there. You don't need to sell the tools. You want to be able to think through the AI applications from like first principles and be able to deliver the transportation is what the clients want, not the tools that they need to go and do that with.
Welcome back to Founder Mode,
where we bring on builders, operators, and visionaries shaping the systems we'll all be living in tomorrow.
Today we're talking about the global economy and how it's evolved. I think first onshore, then offshore, and now this increasingly automation we're seeing with AI, and pretty exciting guest that we've got on.
Yeah, we're digging into what that means for founders, not just from a technology perspective, but also human, strategic, and an ethical one too. Kevin, what's something that you automated or offshored this past week?
Yeah, we were just talking about it before the show. It was pretty interesting. So we're working with a partner in the healthcare space, and we've integrated with their APIs. And then I was kind of curious of like, hey, who else has done this? What else is working? And they have like a marketplace of all their integrated apps. And so I literally just grabbed the marketplace partner link, threw it into Manus, and was like, hey, find all the companies and then find all the ones that, have this ability to do voice, and then, go pull all their websites, go pull all their founders' information, and basically do like a competitive, deep dive. And then I was like, I'm going to just one shot this. And I threw in there like, just do a SWOT analysis of the features that we have and the capabilities we have and like them. And it was pretty insane that it came back with this graphic with all the dots of the different startups. And some of them weren't startups. They'd been around for many years. And I think one of the things I'm seeing a lot with AI is this kind of whitewashing of AI where it's like, oh, I've had this company, I've been running it for 15 years, and now I'm an AI company because I've added, a search bar or a chat GPT interface or a wrapper around my stuff. And I think what we're going to see more and more is companies that are trying to like market themselves and come to life as AI. But then when you pull back the curtain, it's like not native, wasn't built that way. And so I think it'll be interesting, this sort of battle of like the sort of the dinosaurs that are quickly putting on a different costume, and then those that have sort of built up from the beginning. And I think some will make the transition, and clearly others aren't.
That's right. And it's interesting because of the conversation we just had the other day with Dennis Mortensen. Is like this idea that AI is actually just a means to an end. It is not, you can't just like say you're AI first and then suddenly you're an AI first company. Duolingo got in a lot of trouble for doing this. And so I think it's about, and we talked about the hype cycles, right, with Dennis, and every hype cycle, there's like the cool, trendy thing to say and do. And what you're describing is like, what are the novel use cases where you can apply this new technology to do something powerful? And when we bring that back to the conversation we're having today with Shuja, it's like, what actually should I do with my people that are here co-located with me and my startup onshore, and my people that are offshore that are supporting the team with various things, and then this new extension of the people, which is the machine, the AI, what should it do for us?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we've both seen companies try to outsource or automate too fast and kind of pay for it later.
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
curious on your side.
Yeah, I just talked to a founder who's rethinking the entire offshore model because AI is now markedly cheaper and more accurate than their third-party vendor they were using. And, I know you know this well because you're having these conversations with all the companies you're working with that are like blown away by what the AI can do instead of some of the humans that are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, today's guest is perfect. I mean, Suja's worked across like all stages of this, and literally over the last, more than 20 years. And then also not only operating those companies, but also seeing them, from early stage investments and how those sort of investments have played out. And, pretty interesting. So today we have Shuja Keen, who's worked across tech, venture, and governance, and his work really spans this sort of early stage innovation all the way to the sort of board level strategy of how people are implementing and bringing both initially offshoring, but now AI to life.
Yeah, he's building something new, operating in stealth, which is always fun for us to try to dance around what he can and can't say. But he's thinking deeply about how AI intersects with labor, equity, and long-term innovation. So let's get into it.
Cool. Shuja, welcome to Founder Mode. You've had a front row seat to sort of the evolution of business from sort of onshore to offshore and now to AI. So we're excited to get into it.
Yeah, super excited to be here with friends. So awesome.
Yeah, welcome to Founder Mode, Shuja. Let's start with the big arc. How have you seen this shift from onshoring, probably the start of your career, to a lot of offshoring happening now in the global economy, to AI in addition to or instead of those things. Like, how are you seeing that reshape businesses and the kind of arc of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to date myself, but it goes back. I mean, this started off like 2 decades ago, right? In the early 2000s, when suddenly you had the confluence of the bandwidth costs were coming down dramatically. And with cheaper bandwidth and high quality bandwidth, you could use cheaper labor to do the same workflows. So that was the arc which started off in 2000s, right? And then you start applying newer technologies which came around, right? Because they have high-speed internet, they have video, audio, that are able to do their work remotely. COVID taught us that, right? We could be anywhere and we're not tied to a desk. We're not tied to a physical location. As long as we have good quality internet, we can do the work. And I think that arc has now been saturated. Anyone who wants to leverage low-cost labor markets is able to do this. Globalization trend is over almost. And I think from a more macro perspective, you're also seeing nations are looking to become more resilient in their own supply chain. Oh, that's another thing that you see a post-COVID world. It's a current administration. Right? People want to bring stuff back onshore. So now enter in AI. And AI is, I think, rewinding the clock back to 2002, 2001, when their companies are now figuring out, okay, how do I apply AI into my workflows? Because previously, anything that was well-defined was non-core to the business and you had good training material and data around it, you could leverage remote workforce to do the work. Now, if you have well-defined workflows, good knowledge materials around it, you can get AI to do the work. And I think we are in that early stage of POCs trying to get this stuff off the ground going. But I think this is a longer 20-year arc that we're just we are on the verge of just seeing sort of, mass adoption on it.
What do you think's like the tipping? I mean, the bandwidth thing's interesting. Like, I hadn't thought about that as being the kind of a key catalyst, but like in the tipping point for AI, like what are you seeing as a company or a workflow or a process? You mentioned sort of this like repeatability, highly structured, well defined. Are there other things that you're seeing that are sort of triggering like, okay, now this thing is ready for AI? Like, and is it the thing being ready or AI being ready? Like, which is kind of leading it?
I like to say it's kind of like, I think AI is ready for large scale deployment and adoption, but I think people are not, right? It's like the analogy is like, we all fly so often and you're at the airport. You can see the aircraft right there. The passengers are waiting, but the crew isn't there, right? So it's the same thing here. The AI is ready. It's improving at a pace, at a velocity, which is unprecedented, right? Like Kevin and, like in our careers and Jason in our careers, we've seen this, right? Like these cycles have a certain duration. And I think that duration has just been shrunk dramatically with AI. Like every 3 months, every 6 months, it's improving so rapidly, right? So I think that technology is there. And I think right now what I'm seeing is a lot of companies are focused on POCs, focusing on improving the tools as opposed to what would it take to increase adoption.
Yeah. If you had to explain this kind of current moment we're in to a founder in like one sentence, why are we here now and what's next? How would you encapsulate that for them?
Why are we here now and what's next?
Like if you're talking to a founder and you're giving them this kind of wisdom that you've accrued over the course of your decades building companies, what are you telling them about the current moment and how to think about the future?
I think the trouble is that I think a lot of folks are looking at a playbook which has worked for the last 30 years and I'm trying to adopt it to this next 30-year moment. And I think this is a time to go back to first principles. The way we built companies, the way we built software for the last 30 years was very different, right? We've come to a world just before LLMs and AI is that you had prepackaged software, which then gets customized and deployed in enterprises, right? Which then takes, just as long in terms of resources, in terms of time to implement as it does to just pay the licensing fee. I think with the moment we're in, you almost have this opportunity to go back to first principles. The way you think about building companies today is very different because you now have the capability to build companies or you build software customized to a particular client workflows and not just sell them prepackaged software and then customize it.
What does that next generation of service look like? I mean, you said customized software, like, how does AI cover like more of these edge cases and more of the sort of routine things that people run into? Because I think that's, an interesting insight, right? Is this notion that no longer is it a package sort of one size fits all, but a much more bespoke solution for each individual, that's sort of applying AI.
I'm going to make another analogy here, right? Like I grew up with like flat feet. I could never run like anything to save my life, right? And like, my feet would be hurting, et cetera, et cetera. And then like suddenly I got exposed to this world of custom orthotics. And these orthotics would mold to your feet and suddenly give you the arch support needed that I can go long distances without my feet hurting.
It's
And,
good.
and if I do not have the mechanical equipment in there in my body, then I need to augment it, right? And it's when I was exposed to this custom orthotics world where it's like, oh my God, I can walk like 5 miles, no problem. I can run if I choose to, like, and because now I have the option to do that, right? And I think the same thing is happening with custom software, where until now you were in a fixed, rigid world. You could do some customizations on or configurations on the edges. And what you're trying to do is we used to mold workflows around the software. And today, the software is being built, it's molded around your workflows. And I think
That's the
that's the
key.
difference.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because when you think about the day-to-day business flows that we're building, the workflows for how the humans and the machines are interacting, how you and your feet and the orthotics work together so that you can walk comfortably. Talk more about where you see AI adding that value in real kind of world business cases that you're seeing.
I think like if I go back to real world business, and I think like for the last like 6, 8 months, I've been working across multiple companies in terms of sprints going out, building AI agents for clients and seeing how AI technology can improve and how it's best implemented to customer workflows, right? And, usually clients start off by saying, hey, we want to save money, right? We've got labor and we've been like throwing labor at it. Let me save money. Well, at the same time, we got to be realistic about it, right? That, let's be honest, like humans are pretty fucking hard to beat, like, I mean, we're not replaceable just yet, right? So I think AI today can get to a point where it's pretty good. It's realistic. It sounds human, but should I respond the way a human should? And I think getting that part right is really difficult.
Yeah, it's a good segue. Like, what are the points or the opportunities for founders to sort of rethink this labor distribution in an AI enhanced world? Like, how do you find that boundary of like, where should AI be applied or where should the human be applied? And like, and more importantly, like, as that boundary is shifting, like, how do you continue to iterate and learn?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's no different, right? Like when we think about, and if you do the parallels with offshoring or outsourcing, you would keep like what's core to your business and what's not core to your business, you just give it out, right? Now, similarly, the difficulty is not defining what the agent should do. I think it's defining what the agent should not do, right? Because I think the agent capability sets are increasing. What are things where you have guardrails around it? And that varies by industry, that varies by workflow, that you got to have humans in the loop in certain cases, but in certain cases, you don't need them, right? So, and defining that's very, so I guess like it varies by company, it varies by industry, it varies by what's proprietary and what's not.
What are the areas that you're most excited about when it comes to this kind of investing at the intersection of AI and operations? Like, how do you think about those real life business problems that if we put the human in the loop in the right place, it's a kind of a multiplier effect, right? It's the 1+1=3 as opposed to just 2 or less. Where are the cases where you're seeing this go really well? And if you have examples of stuff where it's like, oh, I kind of watched a company do this the wrong way, I'd be curious to hear that as well.
I think I think until now we've been thinking about with a mindset of finite resources, right? And with the scarcity mindset, you said, okay, I have these finite resources. Where do I best deploy them? With AI, and you can say like, look, you do not have a scarcity mindset. You have a completely abundant mindset. When you then start approaching a problem with that from that perspective, suddenly the scale is enormous, right? And you can have scale which is unprecedented, right? And I think the best example would be, I think a lot of us would be familiar, especially if we have kids, is like Khan Academy, right? Until now, you think about education with a finite mindset, right? You have limited number of resources, limited classrooms, limited teachers, and hence you have a generic educational instruction mode as well as curriculum and the pace, because you've got to teach to the mean. Now, suddenly, with an abundant mindset, where the cost of delivering that comes down dramatically using AI, that you can have a personalized coach for every individual, for every single subject that they have. So no longer are you sort of teaching to the mean, you're teaching to competency maximization. And the pace is like, I could be really good and I can pick up math very quickly, but like chemistry is going to be a struggle for me. So it's going to adopt to my pace. And I think I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about when you have infinite resources, what can you do? And that's applicable in education, it's applicable in healthcare, applicable in financial literacy and enhancement of people overall and like, how we live.
I think it's a great point. I think the other thing that kind of makes me think about when you say that is this notion of like inclusion and like, global like access to this sort of like the best teachers, the best coaches.
Mhm.
And how do you think about that inclusion, more like on an ethical kind of framework, but also this ability, like, whether it's for learning or whether it's for business, that's no longer like centralized or sort of controlled in one area. Now, like anyone has access to the same sort of ability. Are we now building for everyone, or are we now, producing instantly globally? Where like in the old days, the internet sort of always was like, oh, it's equally available, but that never was kind of accurately true. Where I think now with AI, I think the way you're talking, it's like, wow, it could actually be like instantly actually available to everybody at the same time.
Yeah. And I think like if you think about like let's take healthcare and deep dive, right? And I think like a lot of our companies that we're working very closely with are in the healthcare sector, right? And specifically like just take, we've got a shortage of nurses, we've got a shortage of doctors, you have an aging population, you have a growing population. And what are our nurses and doctors doing? They're doing admin work. They're doing busy work. They're highly overqualified to do that work. And that work can be done by AI. Now that leaves time for increased patient care, for increased better outcomes, expanding the coverage area, and so on and so forth, right? So that's just one area where just by using AI, you can relieve overworked doctors and expand access, right? And there are tons and tons and tons of examples as you go across industries like that.
Yeah. I think the healthcare example is spot on, and it's so interesting too because it's also a highly regulated space, right? And so despite this obvious connection between a thing that's readily available to all of us, non-healthcare, like we're just business people doing stuff, well, I'm just going to pull this tool off the shelf. There's so much red tape for these healthcare professionals to then use these tools. I think the things that I know you guys are working on is really interesting as it kind of unlocks and unblocks those folks so they can do the highest leverage things with their time. So I think that's a perfect example of how AI can be leveraged effectively to allow the humans to do the stuff that only humans can do. I think coming back to Kevin's question for a moment, he asked about this idea of inclusion and global access. Can AI really be an empowering platform for everyone? I'd love to hear, because you're very accelerationist right now, Suja, in the way you're talking about all this stuff. And I always have to throw in the contrast. I'm not decel, just to be clear. I believe that all this stuff can get us towards a better future. But when we think about the consequences if we don't figure out the right way to kind of deliver this incredible leap in technology to everyone, like how does it affect the already present inequalities instead of creating opportunities?
I mean, I think like, again, it goes back to what we're saying at a micro level, at a company level, you can start thinking about it at a global macro level as well, right? So I think it all starts off with the vision, right? That having a values first AI blueprint for the public infrastructure, for ethics, education reform, for deployment using in, countries and companies that will win, be the ones that design not just for growth, but for dignity, for resilience, for abundance. And I think that's where we need to sort of take this debate, right? Look, AI is going to happen. It is going to get adopted, but it's not just about adopting AI. It's about designing AI-ready societies.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time thinking and talking about sort of this education opportunity and the notion of the future of work. Like, how do you envision these all coming together? Like, if you were to like sort of like run out a blueprint or sort of walk through a vision for that, like what would it look like to you?
I mean, I can't think. I think there are a lot of smarter people have put a lot of thought into it, right? So I think a really good example is what Greece has done where they partnered up with academics globally. They partnered up with like MIT. They partnered up with practitioners. And they basically launched a national AI strategy focused on the elements that I was talking about, right? The human dignity, ethics, AI research, and infrastructure, right? And I think it's called the blueprint for Greece's AI transformation. So that starts with the vision, right? So just like, and I think like you could share the link with your audience, you can sort of find that blueprint. But I think that is where it starts off from. Like, where are we heading in the next 25, 30 years? What does that world look like? And where do we want to do that, right? If you think about Poland, right? Poland, again, it's a country which has now surpassed GDP per capita, like, over Japan, right? And that came in with this notion of having the vision to be more connected with the global economy, educating their population, and sort of focusing on the right things from their perspective. And now you see the results of that. It's going to surpass GDP per capita compared to Japan by 2020, right? Like this year, that's what like IMF claims, right? There are precedences where you have the vision, you see where the dots are going, and you have the time to invest and not like let hope be a strategy,
Hope is not a strategy. I think that's a one-liner from this episode from you, Shuja. I love it. We call this show Founder Mode, right? And for the founders that are thinking about building teams and companies right now, what's the one thought that you would leave them with when it comes to onshore, offshore AI and how to build the best possible startup in 2025?
Look, people want an Uber, and right now they're being sold car parts. They're like, here you go, here's a steering wheel, here's some engine, go build it yourself.
Yeah.
Bro, I just want to go from point A to point B. Like, just give me an Uber and get me there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the opportunity, right? That you don't need to sell the tools. You want to be able to think through the AI applications from like first principles and be able to deliver the transportation is what the clients want, not the tools that they need to go and do that.
Shuja, where can people find more about your work and reach out to you on what you're building?
Or you can go find me on LinkedIn, and S Keen is my, I think, handle there. That's probably the best way to find me, or Naya Labs at nayalabs.a.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shuja. That was really thoughtful and a balanced conversation. And we're just grateful to have your perspective on the future of work and AI. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That was a layered conversation. What stood out to me was the global learning and this sort of impact on education. And I hadn't thought about it. I mean, obviously my daughter, grew up and used Khan Academy. And sort of, I remember, we were debating this and, she was, I don't know, 6, 7 years old of like, hey, how many lessons or modules do you do? And how many should you do a day? And I think this idea that Suja's like, well, hey, like that pacing is going to vary based on subject and sort of
personalized to the student. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like, so yeah, again, I haven't used Khan Academy in a minute. My daughter's in high school now, but I do think that as a sort of a vector for really understanding how a lot of us can learn, even as, adults now going in and trying to learn new things, AI can actually be a better teacher than, the tools we had, even just a year or two ago.
I totally agree. And with 2 kids under 6, I'm thinking a lot about how they're going to have AI tutors that are and personalized lesson plans. And will that be in addition to or instead of like the classroom learning, right? Like how is learning going to change? And I think Suja's perspective is super interesting. The other thing that I loved was his analogy about orthotics. And it just hit home for me. And I'm sure anyone else out there that had flat feet. Kevin, what were the big 5 takeaways for you from today's episode?
Yeah, I think a bunch of really punchy ones, and the clips are going to be great on this. But I think, AI is ready, but people aren't. Customized software, not the workflows. The hard part is knowing what AI shouldn't do, which I thought was a great little sort of counter take. And just really that AI enables this kind of abundance mindset. And then founders really want Uber, not a bunch of car parts.
Amazing. If this episode gave you new ways to think about how operations, talent, or technology intersect and interplay to build a company, then please send it to another founder that you respect who could benefit.
And make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and help builders find founder mode.
Links to everything that Shuja shared during the episode today will be in the show notes, and we'll make sure that you can reach out to him through his channels.
Awesome. That's a wrap. Because the future of work won't be chosen for you. You'll have to design it.